Trigger warning. Trigger warning. This piece is entitled Domestic Abuse, Rapists, Child Molesters, and the Truckers' Convoy in Ottawa. It's the sad stories we tell ourselves when the outsiders come to town. I would really encourage everyone who lives in Ottawa to take a walk downtown. Over the last couple of weekends, there's been a dance party and a celebration happening, and we're being told to stay away. I'm long a student of psychology and story and narrative, and I'm utterly fascinated by the tales that humans tell, and by the games that we play so often that they become concretized in myth and in legend and in song. There's a big human story unfolding on Parliament Hill with the truckers, and we're all playing a part. If we pause for a minute, we'll recognize the patterns and the structures of this narrative, and perhaps we can lead to the conclusion of this painful episode in humane and enlightened ways. But all too often with this particular story, the ending is dark and tragic. In any case, what we have in front of us is history unfolding. It's the end game of a pandemic, the inevitable results of a visit from one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. It's one of the many predictable and normal social symptoms of pestilence. Downtown smells like diesel. The engines are loud, the weather cold. It's the same bitter February cold here that has had us boast days as the coldest capital on earth more than once in the last few years. When I came in from outside several times on Saturday to warm up, the skin on my face was burning. We're close to 0 Fahrenheit. If you're a trucker, diesel and loud engines, midnight breakdowns, weather delays and long nights in a cab on some godforsaken highway, it's your life. Cold wind toughens your face, ages you prematurely. Lucky is the trucker who lands a cushy route repeated 4 or 5 days a week, normal daytime hours. More likely, especially in this life, early, are the long days, the shift work, the overtime on holidays, and many days or even weeks on the road away from family. I drove a truck for a few years, mostly 5-ton delivery in Vancouver, my university years, and I still have nightmares about crossing routes like the frighteningly narrow Pattilla Bridge and the thin lanes of the Lion's Gate. I drove crew in the bush for a while, 12 passenger vans and 4x4 super crews towing trailers. For a while, I drove a 26-speed Max Special in the yard, moving pups and trailers on and off the door of a shipping company 5 days a week. 3 a.m. in the chill of Vancouver rain isn't fun for picking up and dropping trailers and running them in and out of a warehouse onto and off of loading docks. I can't imagine some of the conditions truck drivers across Canada endure on a daily basis. It's a tough job that most of us will never have to think about. I'm as agnostic and ambivalent as I can be about the cause that has moved truckers to protest here in Ottawa over the last 10 days. While it's been cast as a movement of a fringe radical and racist minority with unacceptable views, I see it as the legitimate response of a growing number of people in Canada, perhaps even the majority now, who are sick of government-imposed restrictions. There's no contesting that we have seen suspensions of our constitutional rights in numerous ways over the last 2 years. Real Canadians have real concerns, especially perhaps when watching a football game in the US where 100,000 fans gathered together with no masks in sight, while we can't have more than 5 people in our homes at a time, and some provinces have curfews. I'm not at the stage of frustration to go personally out to protest, but I certainly recognize that people feel passionately enough to push back. And truckers have given many Canadians permission to say or even yell out loud, enough is enough. Those are the speech rights in our Constitution. And if you don't agree with those people, we live in a democracy. When the government has broken its contract with the people, it's the right of the people, and Ghandi and Henry David Thoreau would say it's our obligation, to check unjust political power through civil resistance, peaceful resistance. In spite of this, everyone in Ottawa seems to be finding common anger, commiserating over how much this convoy is inconveniencing us and impacting the city. There is an impact. I don't dispute it. I was downtown both weekends to talk to people about another issue, an issue that's important to me. Gender ideology in schools, because we've never had the public conversation in Canada due to government-sponsored censorship and threats of civil and criminal prosecution now enshrined in law. I have a deep and serious concern about what we teach kids beginning as young as 6 or 7 in public schools. A mythology, a religious idea that we exist as humans, having an identity that can be separated from the body. This is like teaching about the soul. I wasn't alone in bringing a different cause to the main event. The carnival has a big top. They host the show. But somewhere, in all the stories at least, there's always a bearded lady, a juggler, a preacher, a grifter playing three-card-monte, and the inevitable pickpocket. That just goes with the show. And if we're honest, we're having a similar collective reaction to the rough and coarse truckers and their caravans as we've had historically to circus gypsies coming to town. We clutch our pearls and we cry, "Lock up your daughters!" With the truckers here, we breathlessly claim that they as a group are responsible for desecrating our monuments against a backdrop of 50 to 70,000 individual people from all over the country gathered to express grievances against the way the government has been handling this particular horseman of the apocalypse. We narrate that women who have suffered sexual assault are terrified to go outside. Karen Brown, the president of the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario, claims that the supremacists, misogynistic truckers are brandishing racist imagery and that this is harming poor children as well as traumatizing the racialized and the alphabetized. When the gypsies and the highwaymen come to town, there's suddenly someone convenient to blame when Bessie the cow stops giving milk. In the old stories, it was a gypsy witch and her prognostications over the cards, or some potion she sold that were responsible for the bread's failure to rise, or for the hens who stopped laying eggs. When the crops failed, it was the gypsies. When someone's house caught fire, or the wheat was moldy, gypsies. We get the term getting gypped from these negative associations. A thievery and grifting often appeared in tales of people who had lived life on the road, gypsy or not. It's a natural human instinct to be suspicious of outsiders, and our human stories are filled with this prejudice, this human instinct, territorial, protective. And so too is our tendency to believe any and every lie and wild distortion about the atrocities those people are committing or are capable of. We're suspicious of outsiders and territorial about our homes and about our public commons. It's a story we've acted out countless times in human history. The Romans called the people from the village and from the country paganu, the pagans. And we know the accompanying stories we hold about them. Devil-worshipping, infant-sacrificing sodomites ritually raping incautious women and drinking baby's blood and the excretions of their pituitary glands. They do this, of course, while conducting orgiastic sex festivals and incantations. It's arguable that societies who've held these prejudices, perhaps, fears of outsiders, have fared better from an evolutionary standpoint by being skeptical of travelers and highwaymen. It's a human instinct to protect our communities. And as a student of archetype and psychology and story, the patterns of emotions and the lines of division emerge as predictably as in any folktale we learned as kids. I see now we've all taken our character roles in this standoff with the truckers, and if you pause, you might see it too. This instinct, this human pattern that plays out over and over again. It makes it easy to jump to stereotypes and to accept hyperbole about the truckers from our politicians, from our news sources, from social media. even though we know these platforms are engineered to make us angry, to polarize us, and to drive us to outrage. I could, like so many others, demand these racists, these rapists, these criminals stop terrorizing our city and go home. I refuse, however, because I speak out against this dangerous human tendency to tell stories we're telling, which we know from history lead us to atrocious outcomes. I am become one of them in the minds of many, a defender of witches and rapists and pagans. I know that it's normal to be suspicious of outsiders, and it's normal to react this way, to embrace the stereotypes in fear, but I can't stand quietly while it happens, because there is a human virtue we're missing, and we're plenty capable of embracing it instead of falling collectively to this hysterical vice. We can tell a better story together. We can sing a better song. Over history, this story repeats over and over again. We build monstrous and false stories about groups of others in our in-group narratives. There's been a lot of talk in recent months about mass formations and mass hysterias, and us as humankind, killed the pagans systematically over centuries via playing this human pattern out over and over again, this archetype. We hold stories about the seedy underbellies of the traveling circus, the loose morals of minstrels, the troupe of actors and soothsayers. Over and over we use these false narratives to drive the townspeople to frenzy. It's a dangerous life to exist as a visiting outsider, as the new person in a small town, as a gypsy, as a Jew, as an immigrant. We, humans, ostracize outsiders. We other them, and we hold them out from society, leaving them on the social fringes, marginalizing them, scapegoating them for all the evils in our lives. We take out our frustrations on them. Someone broke a window almost a kilometer away. It must have been the truckers. Someone set a fire. It was the truckers' fault. One person out of more than 50,000 carried a Confederate flag, a masked agitator who was immediately asked to leave. One case in more than 50,000 people carried the vile symbol of the swastika. They weren't even at the main protest and were chased away or scurried under a rock somewhere, but everyone gathered to protest after that was branded a white supremacist, a bigot, a racist. Just about the most brutal insults and allegations a person can make today against another. The narrative structure we're enacting is the same insider-outsider narrative that sent the Jews and the Roma people, the gypsies, to camps in the Second World War. There is no difference. Over and over again, this archetype plays out. We are the good and the virtuous, and they are the heathen crowds. Summon the army, deploy police. The sow will not give milk to piglets. Today we live in a world hyper-vigilant against prejudice, racism, discrimination. We have diversity and equity police in our workforces ferreting out microaggressions and investigating people on suspicions and secret allegations. This is not hyperbole. We know that people's careers, businesses, reputations in this world today can turn on single words. If a woke inquisitor becomes sufficiently interested and the mob joins in the attack. We stand idle by, refusing to speak because it's not happening to us. We're bullied into parroting certain narratives, and we're given moral excuse to pile on to people like Joe Rogan and Whoopi Goldberg and J.K. Rowling, but also onto concerned teachers like the 20-year veteran who raised questions about K-6 kids being given books that play down the casual sterilization being conducted on vulnerable children all across Canada today in the name of inclusion. It feels good to stand in our moral righteousness and our indignation condemning the truckers, like woke mobs chanting for cancellations. Yet we are acting out the very sets of patterns and behaviors that lead to the kinds of outcomes we claim to abhor. We're marginalizing groups of outsiders, making stereotypes and unfounded accusations against an entire group of people by ascribing extreme views and behaviors to that group and attacking anyone who doesn't overtly join the mob and condemn them with us. We no longer extend any good faith to a person who stands accused. We think in black and white terms about oppressors with power and the oppressed without. We gasp in indignation, and we tut-tut about the patriarchy and their ephemeral white privilege, as the cancel mob takes over and takes down institution after institution in this country. We applaud the justice mob in the name of protecting the marginalized victims of white supremacy and the patriarchy, while we tell ourselves that amplifying false narratives and stereotypes is a moral and righteous justice. Here we are again, participating in the inquisitor's lie and smear, and making the same kinds of hysterical accusations about the outsiders as we always have. In Canada, though few realize it yet, we have a non-profit organization, government-sponsored, that has a blacklist of political targets who are attacked, whose reputations are destroyed, and who are vilified in the public commons with no due process. This is a primitive story, too much like when we once put people in stocks and threw garbage at them, or when we stoned them in the town square, or when we ripped them to pieces in mad frenzies and mob hysteria. This is now business as usual for our government. I have friends on this list, libeled and slandered, investigated by their employers, losing their businesses and careers and reputations. They're on this list for no other reason than questioning the narrative that we're being given it. So I question it. Over the last few days, the lifelong friend of Prime Minister Trudeau encouraged Canadians to donate money to this panel of self-appointed moral inquisitors in the name of anti-hate. They make examples of their convictions, hanging the cancelled on their homepage like corpses of gypsies hung from city ramparts to warn off people with unacceptable views. These are the stiff penalties of failure to abide, examples that wrong speech and wrong think in Canada will be silenced by an organization that boasts federal government funding and overt endorsements. In Canada, we've thrown out the principles of actual justice, where a person can face accusers, question evidence, and mount a defense. The customs and laws that enshrine these principles of rights to a reputation and to the right to live unmolested by hysterical inquisitors and witch hunters dates back thousands of years. Moses established that it was a sin before God, one of the 10 most serious sins, to bear false witness against another. And the Magna Carta, over 900 years ago, the foundations of our common law in society today, enshrine these protections in writing, guaranteeing a right to a fair trial and a jury of unbiased peers. Never mind that we have a sacred constitution in this country that says the same thing, and that we're supposed to hold this at the forefront of our public policy and as the guide of our elected governments and our public institutions. One of the pillars of healthy communication and conflict resolution, as many listeners may know, from Stephen Covey, is to seek first to understand. We have a clear conflict at hand. In the name of the highest values we hold as humans, can we pause for a moment and simply ask ourselves, what would make someone get in their vehicle, drive 3,000 kilometers in the middle of the winter, some with children, at their own expense, so they could sleep in a vehicle near 0 degrees Fahrenheit or minus 25 Celsius for weeks? How bad does it have to be in their minds to undertake that risk? The truckers did not take this up lightly. Were you able to get there? How bad does it have to be Are you still forefronting the historical claims of child sacrifice and the comparison of truckers to wife beaters and sex offenders that was published in the Ottawa Citizen? Are you stuck on the insinuations of a dangerous, misogynistic rape culture that's laid siege to our city, that's making the rounds on social media? What would have to happen for you, as a human being, to decide that things are so intolerable that driving for a week straight through the Canadian prairies at the end of January seemed like a good idea? Are you still with, but racists? But the noise! The horns! Did your cow stop giving milk? Please go back and think about that question for a minute. Yes, I'm scolding you like a fucking child. Engage some higher orders of your thinking. We live in the most advanced society in the world, for God's sakes. Surely you're smart enough to do that. One of the tropes that's consistently hurled at people on the right, the real or the perceived right, is that they have xenophobic and racist positions on immigration. I'm sure there's plenty of people in the truckers' convoy who have concerns about immigration that you might not agree with. I'm sure that most of my readers who want a reason to keep the big bad truckers out, who are stereotyping and believing the salacious accusations and third-hand gossip about what's happening downtown. We would deplore this kind of bigotry and racist behavior. What kind of uncivilized person would take such an egregious stance about poor immigrants displaced by famines, disasters, or economic hardships and political necessity just to try to create a better future for themselves? How could anyone lack the empathy to understand why poor refugees have to go through, to leave everything behind, to risk everything they have, to travel from a foreign place in hopes of making their lives better? The stories we're acting out in our lives are stories that humans run in predictable patterns over and over again. You same liberals shaming people with a different political view about immigration, about travelers from another place, are hysterically defending false narratives and tropes about the agendas of people who came to protest lockdowns. The outsiders, the immigrants, those people. Take a walk downtown. It's fucking loud. It's loud. Sometimes the engines are revving like giant primal beasts roaring against threats. Maybe instead of believing the hysterical narratives that others are telling you to believe in, go and see for yourself. Draw your own conclusions. Listen for that signal in all the noise. See if you can understand what other people are feeling and thinking, and understand that as Canadians, that is our right. The giant wall of speakers on Saturday bumping downtown, I saw joyous players crying for an end to government overreach, which is their constitutional right to do, and a constitutional obligation of the government to provide and enforce. They were singing "We Are the World" and Bob Marley's Redemption Song. Those fucking monsters.